Hello, everybody. I'm Will Taegel, Dean at the Wisdom School of Ubiquity University. And today we're considering reflections on Hopi prophecies, as well as beginning reflections on other prophecies from tribal traditions. I'll be talking for a while and then we'll have some responses, and we also will have responses from some of you. There are many of you here with us today that are new, and I welcome you. We're also broadcasting live from my office here in Wimberley in the Texas Hill Country, and we have a room full of people live that we're glad to have the integration of in-person with online experiences. Picture in your mind's eye a large freshwater lake halfway down a sacred mountain range. From above the massive flows several streams into a pristine lake. Today and next month, I will explore with you streams flowing into the body of water known as Hopi and Indian prophecy, with particular attention to Hopi visions. You'll note that I use the word Indian and not Native American because many of North American tribes prefer the term Indian these days. The nodal point of my teaching will be a call to those of you who want actively to be part of a remnant tribe of humans who are becoming bridge walkers to a new civilization. The first stream flowing into this lake of prescient knowledge is a decision Hopi elders made way back in 1947. It was 2 years after the end of World War II, and Hopi elders gathered in a council to consider the state of the world. Up until this time, they had considered Hopi wisdom to be directed to their tribe alone. One contingent of conservative elders in this conversation still maintained that position, but a representative of the Bluebird clan stood to speak from a holistic perspective. He told the council that his training in their oral tradition as an elder taught him years before that, quote, a gourd of ashes would fall from the sky. He felt it was his responsibility as an earth being, a human, to make this and other prophecies available to the larger earth, since it was evident to him that the gourd of ashes in their prophecies was in fact the atomic bomb. Immediately, other elders stood to support him and say that they too had been led by Spirit to share the Hopi tribal wisdom with all beings on earth, bar none. These new era elders concurred that the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan was indeed the gourd of ashes, and the vehicle of the gourd of ashes, United States government. They also noticed that this government had tested the gourd of ashes at White Sands, New Mexico, and they had known this and yet had remained silent, even though they knew the prophecies predicted this very happening. They now felt they could no longer remain quiet with these political and military developments. They could no longer stand on the sidelines in their Mesa retreat. As a result of this council, the Hopi elders sent out from their circle wise people to travel to tribes of the Americas. Such an act of telling others of their wisdom created a split in their tribe between the conservatives, who wanted to keep their traditions contained in the tribe only, and the visionary elders who said humans are nearing the 12th hour and we can no longer keep it to ourselves. It is time, they said, to link with elders across the face of earth in order to avoid what might be one of Earth's most terrible disasters. My two teachings, today and in April, will point us in the direction of exploring what the holistic elders have offered us, not only from the Hopi, but also from other American Indian tribes. We are best served here today if we think of the Hopi as the gatherers of many Indian forms of prescient wisdom. We also can give thanks for the tribal elders who have been willing to reach out to the larger human endeavor. Pause for a moment. The second stream flowing into this lake of wisdom becomes apparent in one of the emissaries sent by the Hopi Council to travel the continent. His name, White Feather. The year was 1958, springtime. White Feather had wandered around the continent collecting various tribal wisdoms and telling many American tribes the Hopi prophecies. He had also been down to the Toltecs at Teotihuacan and apologized to them for hoarding Hopi visions and for keeping this wisdom secret. He told them of his council of elders and how they could no longer hold tightly to the wisdom because of the gourd of ashes, and how it had shaken them to their core. It had waked them up to a kind of selfishness at keeping such important information to themselves. After a decade of his wanderings, White Feather was returning to the sacred mesas in the Four Corners. His mode of transportation? Walking across the great American desert. Walking even though he was a man nearing his 90th year. Tired and footsore, he started to hitchhike. In the distance, he saw an older auto approaching and held up his universal thumb. Meanwhile, driving along a lonely road in eastern New Mexico, a young Presbyterian minister by the name of David Young saw this dusty figure holding up his wrinkled thumb. I think mine will suffice. David hesitated. It was an unusual sight. Should he stop? He felt a churning in his chest that caused him to tap his brakes. Little did he know who was getting into his car. White Feather glanced at David as he settled into the passenger side, but said nothing, as if he was sizing up the man driving the car. The old man sensed this was a pivotal moment, one in which he might share, for the first time in 1,000 years, with a white brother, the Hopi way. But at first, he said nothing. After many sun-drenched miles, the elder finally spoke to David. I am White Feather, a Hopi of the ancient Bear clan. In my long life, I've traveled through this land seeking out my brothers and sisters and learning from them many things filled with wisdom. I have followed the sacred paths of my people who inhabit the forests and the lakes up in the northeast. I've been to the land of ice and long nights in the north. I've been to the places of the holy pyramids in the south, stones built many years ago by the grandmothers and grandfathers. From all of these, I've heard stories of the past and the prophecies of the future. Today, many of the prophecies have turned into newspaper stories. What we have predicted is now, David, coming to pass. The past grows longer and the future shorter. The old man shifts into the third person, speaking as if to emphasize his letting go of his earth walk. And now I, Whitefeather, am dying. Whitefeather is dying. His sons have all joined the ancestors, and soon he too shall be with them. There is no one left, no one to recite and pass on this ancient wisdom. My people have grown tired of the old ways. If you go to the mesas, they're messy and cluttered. The great ceremonies that tell of our origins are almost all abandoned, forgotten. Yet, even the forgetfulness of my people has been foretold in our prophecies. My people await the Pahana, the white lost brothers, who come from the stars, as do all the brothers and sisters in the land. He will not be like white men we know now, who are cruel and greedy and have pinched faces. We were told of their coming long ago, but we still await the Pahana. We will be able to identify them by their faithfulness of their practices that sustain our earth. The fourth world that we're in now, David, will end soon, and the fifth world will begin. This the elders everywhere know. The signs over many years have been fulfilled. Now let me tell you about the signs, David. This is the first sign. We are told of the coming of the white-skinned men. They were like Pahana, but they didn't live like Pahana. These white men took the land that was not theirs, and these white men struck their enemies with thunder and fire sticks. This is the second sign, David. Our lands will see the coming of spinning wheels filled with voices. And in his youth, my father saw this prophecy come true. This is the third sign, David. A strange beast like a buffalo, but with great horns, will overrun the land in large numbers. This is the fourth sign. The land will be crossed by snakes of iron. This is the fifth sign, David. The land shall be crisscrossed by a giant spider web. This is the sixth sign. The land shall be crisscrossed with rivers of stone that make pictures in the sun. This is the seventh sign, David. You will hear of the sea turning black and many living things dying because of it. This is the eighth sign, David. You will see many youth who wear their hair long like my people, and they will come to join the tribal nations to learn their ways and wisdom. And this is the ninth and last sign, David. You will hear of a dwelling place in the heavens above the earth that shall fall out of the sky with a great crash. There also will appear a blue star Kachina, and very soon after this, the ceremonies of my people will cease. These are the signs that a great destruction is coming, David. The world shall rock to and fro. The white man will battle against other people in other lands. He will battle with those who possess the first light of wisdom. There will be many columns of smoke and fire such as Whitefeather has seen the white man make in the deserts not far from here. Many of my people, understanding these prophecies, will be safe. And those who live in sacred places also shall be safe. Then there will be much to rebuild. And soon, very soon after, the Pahana will return. He shall bring with him the dawn of this fifth world, David. He shall plant the seeds of his wisdom in our hearts. And even now, as I speak to you, the seeds are being planted in the hearts of many young people. These seed people shall smooth the way to the emergence and the passageway to the fifth world. Whitefeather pauses. He and David ride for a distance. Then the elder continues. But David, Whitefeather shall not see any of this. I'm old and I'm dying. Perhaps you will see it. In time. In time. The old Indian fell silent. They had arrived at his destination, and Reverend David Young stopped to let him out of his car. David was mystified, humbled, and confused. The two men never met again. David Young drove away, astounded at what he had just heard, even if he was confused. Pulling over to the side of the road, he wrote down these prophecies as fast as he could. Keep in mind, this was 5 years before Frank Waters would write the book of Hopi that we have been reading. David Young's scribblings may have been the first the outside world had of these visions. Indeed, Frank Waters may have known about this document and used it as a resource. Back at his church, Reverend Young stayed up all night long, drank some coffee. He knew he had been given something of historical importance. He had an intuition that in the language of his theology, his Presbyterian theology, that all of this had been written long before. And he believed that he had been, quote, predestined to pick up this old hitchhiker and receive these prophecies. But with whom could he share this wisdom? Not with the government, not with the universities, and certainly not with his congregation. The congregation was of a conservative persuasion and likely would hear these words as blasphemy. Finally, David hit on a strange strategy of giving the wisdom of the ages to his tiny youth group that met on Sunday evening. Perhaps they would be receptive, he thought, since their hearts were still open. The next day, he mimeographed off the wisdom and sat reading what had been passed to him by Whitefeather. He had purple ink on his hands from the creaky mimeograph machine. The next Sunday evening, he read the wisdom to a small youth group. And to his utter surprise, the youth lapped up the prophecies like hungry wolf pups getting milk from their mothers. Soon, these young people were disseminating the mimeograph pages with youth groups across eastern New Mexico and West Texas. That fall, I was a freshman in college at a small Methodist school in Abilene, Texas, where some of David's youth group happened to attend. The ancient prophecies spread like wildfire through our freshman class. We had not yet been jaded with sophomoric skepticism. Also, our small college had been founded by J.W. Hunt, who was born on an Indian reservation in Oklahoma. And in his honor, we built a teepee village every fall. Around the campfires in front of the authentic teepees, the people from David Young's youth group shared these Hopi visions. We were 18-year-olds lapping up the wisdom of the ages. We heard the visions. We became seeds that were planted deeply in our hearts. Some years later, I sought out Reverend Young. but I found he had died. So he too did not live to see the further fulfillment of this remarkable prophecy. Neither did Whitefeather. In many ways, I gather all of you around a new council fire today to continue what was started for me in front of a council fire so long ago. You and I may have been brought to this council fire today for a purpose. And I ask you the question, are we to be the seed humans of a new era predicted by Whitefeather? And if so, what does that entail? That brings me to the third stream flowing into our lake of Hopi knowledge, namely Frank Waters. I bet you thought I'd never get there. We will soon see that Waters' version of these prophecies is a bit different from Whitefeather's. Waters was, like many of us, a mongrel, part Cheyenne and many other bloodlines. In 1946, at the age of 44, he moved to Taos, New Mexico, where he launched his inquiry into Hopi wisdom. In 1960, he received a substantial grant from a large foundation to record some of this wisdom. Eventually, that became the Book of Hopi, which was published in 1963. While the Hopi were still secretive, White Bear of the Bear Clan and others from the Bluebird Clan had agreed for Waters to come and live in their midst on the Mesa of Four Corners. It is not clear whether they even knew about Whitefeather. Notice that Whitefeather in David Young's story and White Bear in Frank Waters' story are both members of the Bear Clan. As an aside, this note is important to me because some years later, a member of the Bear Clan would become my mentor for a decade, and I would receive prophecies from him that I will expand on next month. Arriving from Taos at the second mesa, Frank Waters trudged up the Table Mountain to a house at a place called Pumpkin Seed Point. He was scheduled to stay with White Bear and his wife, Brown Bear, who herself was white. The house was earthen floors and cracks in the walls that let in the north wind. Kachina images hung on whitewashed walls. Eagle feathers, called pahos by the Hopi, dangled from the ceiling. Toilets were outside and required a walk through frigid winds for Waters to relieve himself in the middle of the night. Sewage ran down an ancient drainage system. A single Coleman lantern gave light, so Frank Waters had to adjust his eyes to the dark and still could not see very well. The next morning at dawn, he squinted his eyes and looked around for something important, ceremonial garb, maybe a mystery. But to his surprise, he saw something in the corner of the room that totally surprised him. What he saw in the room of this ancient, wise person was golf clubs. You're kidding, right? Frank Waters came all this way and this is what appears? Later, White Bear would say that golf was the only thing that white man brought that was any good. Twice per month, he hitched a ride to Gallup, New Mexico, 130 miles away to play. We can garner from Waters' recollection that White Bear may not have been the most pure vessel of Hopi wisdom, since it was channeled through his golfing. Despite this jolt from decaying Western civilization, Waters soon discovered that White Bear and others that he met were indeed repositories of wisdom. That brings me to a fourth stream of wisdom flowing into our Hopi lake of knowledge. Through frank waters, we receive a view into the four worlds or civilizations that constitute the human epic, according to the Hopi and according to other tribal traditions. These civilizations move in cycles, or we might say in developmental phases. Let's look at those phases for a moment. In the first cycle of the civilization, there is always a sense of partnership and compatibility as humans live in harmony and balance with all creation. There's a flow between all the parts that serve the whole and includes information for living and dying and living again, and a free expression of mother tongue between humans and all the species. Then the second phase of civilization begins. Humans follow a consciousness that separates and estranges them from their habitat. Their technology evolves remarkably, as does their ability to accumulate material goods. Eventually, wealth is concentrated in a ruling class, and spiritual values and ethical standards are blurred and then lost. Leadership loses its sense of well-being for the whole. Ultimately, the habitat is fouled and no longer supports the profligate lifestyle of the ruling humans. Then a third phase launches. Mother Earth begins a rebalancing through climate change, droughts, floods, ice, fires, storms, earthquakes, and other events. In the fourth phase, an era of purification and reckoning results in the demise of most humans and other species. Then a fifth phase comes into being. A remnant cadre of humans goes underground and eventually emerges out of a hole in the earth, a sipapu, as the seeds of a new civilization. Then the cycle begins again, with the possibility that humans have learned from the previous cycles of civilization, so that the new era is now on a spiral of evolutionary consciousness. The spiral, then, is the central symbol, not only for the Hopi, but also for the Toltec, the Cahokia, and the Mayan versions of civilizations. We are now, according to this view, in the fourth world or civilization and moving to the fifth. For some decades now, I have said that we humans are addicted to Western civilization. This is an addiction that runs deep in most all of us. These addictive practices are sending us into the deep chaos of global destruction. And if continued, will result in our going to a deep bottom that may include the demise of our species. But alternatively, it has yet to be determined whether a conscious element of humans, a remnant, can allow us to hit a low bottom and push off of this low bottom of addiction into a fifth civilization. Questions arise. Are the recent assaults on the environment by this administration and some key corporations the dying gasp of the fourth civilization, as the Hopis had predicted? Is this administration a mirror of what we all have become? And most important, is this administration simply making clear to us that even more progressive forms in years past were also part of a dying civilization? If so, we will descend into a deep bottom, or perhaps cultural creatives such as you might assist us in hitting a high bottom so we can push off to a new era. Before we address these questions, I want to underline and amplify a Frank Waters statement of the creation story and the emergence of humans out of Mother Earth. As we follow the oral traditions of the Hopi, the Toltecs, the Cahokias, and the Mayas, we find that they speak of this series of civilizations that rise and fall, not unlike what Arnold Toynbee has mentioned. Each time they are destroyed by huge climactic events. Is it possible these tribal stories are not just prophecies? Hold on here a moment. Are these stories actual oral histories that stretch back 150,000 years or more? Let's see now. Is there anything in the neurosciences to support such a claim? How do we get from the fourth civilization to the fifth? Waters tells us with this simple Hopi statement that you read. A structural parallel to this mother and child symbol is the kiva itself. The earth mother is the kiva. The sipapu, the small hole in the floor of the kiva, represents the womb, the place of emergence from the preceding world that leads us into the next world. The Hopi, even this day, reenact this emergence from the third world to the fourth world. This small hole in their kivas is also an opening for our civilization to the next. Each month in the Earth Tribe, we enter the Inipi, which is our equivalent of the Hopi kiva. In the center of the lodge is the sipapu, the hole, the passageway between the worlds, the civilizations, where we place the hot rocks. For decades now, I have pondered the emergent story of the Hopi as I enter the sweat lodge. I have loved the story, and I have experienced the ceremony as a personal rebirth many times. I have seen it also as a tribal rebirth. But something was missing in terms of a passageway toward a larger civilization if the story of the opening in the ground was only a metaphor. Was there something in the archaeological or geological record that actually supported such a passageway? Could there actually have been events in Earth's story that indicate the possibility of three previous and advanced civilizations? For decades, I could not find a correlate in scientific literature. Still, I kept asking, were the Hopi stories metaphorical, or were they describing actual events? Then finally, I read two geological accounts that provided me with an opening as a correlate. Here are the articles. On May 22nd, 2007, in the New Scientist magazine, there was a headline that captured my attention. It was this: did a comet wipe out prehistoric Americans? I said to myself. But I needed more than just a headline. It was 7 years before, in 2014, I found an article in the Journal of Geology that explored the same question. Here are some of the proposals, a team of researchers that point to a passageway between civilization. Here's a summary of what they said. At about the 13,000 year mark in North America, we were covered by a 3-mile deep ice sheet that stretched from the Arctic to the Pacific Ocean, across Canada and upper US to Greenland, and even into Northern Europe. Now just think about that for a minute. 3 miles deep was this ice sheet. The research article then proposes that one or more comets exploded over the ice sheet, partially destabilizing the Laurentide ice sheet and triggering what came to be called the Younger Dryas geologic era. The researchers thought the large comet, note this, the comet was 62 miles in diameter. It blew up as it neared the ice sheet and shattered into pieces, but some of the pieces themselves were 2.5 miles in diameter. The largest of the pieces fell over Canada and melted prodigious amounts of water that flowed south. Several smaller portions hit the southern United States and started wildfires, wherein virtually a large part of the US and Mexico were on fire. So get this picture. You have a huge melting of the ice sheet and a wall of water that came down through the state of Washington, 1,300 feet high and about 100 miles wide, carving out much of the Columbia River Basin. And at the same time, a massive fire stretched through the high plains and down into Mexico. Yikes! What happened to humans? They retreated, according to the article, into mountain caves to become a remnant. Could it be, I ask myself, after an extended period of time, these transitional humans emerged and formed a new world and formed what would become our civilization? But a question arose in my mind. Why don't we have craters for comets 62 miles wide? Why don't we have any record? The article had an answer. The comets hit the 3-mile deep ice shelf and melted the ice, but didn't reach the soil and rock surface, and thus left no crater. While the hypothesis of this article remains controversial, it switched on a light for me. The whole Clovis civilization disappeared, as did horses, camels, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, numerous other species, and not gradually, but in a massive disruption of equilibrium. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another. Literally, one civilization passed into another. And if that could happen once, I said to myself, perhaps the Hopis were not just smoking some weed. Perhaps it had happened 3 times, now going on 4. Perhaps there were other ancient civilizations that, as the stories tell us, did actually go through a cycle that they described. And are these words of wisdom then describing for us a similar passageway in which we can travel? Is our planet currently already in the midst of a dramatic shift? Are we already plunging into the chaos that's described as the end of the cycle? To answer that question, let's return to the 9 prophetic statements that I mentioned earlier to see if they are being fulfilled. This is the first sign. We are told of the coming of the white-skinned men like Pahana, but they don't live like Pahana. These white men took the land that was not theirs, and these men struck their enemies with thunder and fire sticks. Note, European invaders came with sticks that shot fire, guns as we call them. This is the second sign. Our lands will see the coming of spinning wheels filled with voices. Actually, Judah's grandmother, Judah sitting behind me there, what was her name?
My grandmother?
Yeah.
Anna.
Judah's grandmother, Anna, rode in a covered wagon from Nebraska to Oregon, and she herself was part of fulfilling this sign. This is the third sign. A strange beast like a buffalo, but with great horns, will overrun the land in large numbers. And I'll tell you what, my neighbor next door has fulfilled this sign with his longhorn cattle. This is the fourth sign. The land will be crossed by snakes of iron. This prophecy is a clear reference to railroads. This is the fifth sign. The land shall be crisscrossed by a giant spider web. Well, I look out the window here, out my window right now, and I can see electric and telephone wires that fulfill this spider web prophecy. This is the sixth sign. The land shall be crisscrossed with rivers of stone that make pictures in the sun. Now that one stumped me. But with the coming of our freeway system, this sign has been fulfilled. But what about the pictures? If you travel across the four corners where the Hopi live, you will soon see mirages on the freeways that appear as pictures. This sign has been fulfilled. This is the seventh sign. You will hear of sea turning black and many living things dying because of it. I personally conducted ceremony for the workers of a British petroleum refinery, including those who lost their lives. And then we know not only that the Gulf of Mexico turned black, but also Prince William Sound in Alaska with Exxon Valdez. This is the eighth sign. You will see many youth who wear their hair long like my people come and join the tribal nations to learn their ways and wisdom. Once each month, in fact, this Saturday at our sweat lodges, you will find youth wearing their hair long, searching for tribal wisdom. Long-haired millennials across the planet are fulfilling this sign. And this is the ninth and last sign. You will hear of a dwelling place in the heavens above the earth that shall fall with a great crash. There will also appear a blue star Kachina. On February 1st, 2003, you remember what happened? Skylab Columbia fell out of the sky, traveling at 17,500 miles per hour. 2 weeks ago, Judith and I drove past where the largest section of the Skylab fell on a lake near Tyler, Texas, where we will, ironically, have a course in June on the subject of happiness. Also, there are many sightings of the blue star Kachina, and you can read about one of them in my blog. But these are the signs that a great destruction is upon us. What will happen according to the prescient wisdom after the 9 signs are fulfilled? The world shall rock to and fro. The white man will battle against other people in other lands, and she will battle with those possessed of the first light of wisdom. Is this reference to Iran or maybe Israel? Diseases will spread and a great dying off will occur. Notice the plural use of diseases: AIDS, Ebola. Epidemiologists are concerned now about a massive number of parents who are refusing to have their children immunized, thus setting us up for a massive fulfillment of this part of the wisdom. But keep in mind, there are remnant humans living among us right now, remnants from the first civilization, remnants from the second civilization, remnants from the third civilization, and now from the fourth civilization. Could it be you and I are remnants? Remember what Whitefeather said: many of my people understanding the prophecies shall be safe, and those who live in sacred places also shall be safe. Then there will be much to rebuild, and soon, very soon after, the Pahana will return. And the Pahana will bring with them the dawn of the fifth world. They will plant the seeds of wisdom in our hearts. And even now, said Whitefeather, the seeds are being planted. These seed people shall smooth the way, the passageway into the fifth world. So it is that I have spoken today my version of the Hopi stories, as I encountered them long ago, 5 years before the book of Hopi. Let those those of you and those in this room who have ears to hear, hear. And let those who awaken to a larger consciousness step forward to be the seeds of a new era. And may we hit a high bottom and push off into new possibilities. And now next month, I will address these issues. I will paint a profile of the Pahana, the seed people, about whom White Feather spoke when he rode in the car with David Young. Next month, I will explicate the petroglyphs and the pictographs that give us much information as a map for this transition. I will link the Hopi visions to other Indian visions, including some of my own, given to me by the Bear Clan. I will invite all of us to become bridge walkers into the new era. So we'll go to Mark Ryan.
Hi, well, you can hear me, I trust.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you for that very powerful presentation. I just like to push you a little to expand on it. These are extremely compelling stories, and I've been fascinated by the book. I'm still in the great mystery cycles, and I love those mysteries and their connection with the earth and so forth. I'm like to question you a bit on your concept of the nature of prophecy, and the degree of determinism that could imply. You did start off with a comparison with the question of predestination, and there are, in my training as a historian of Western thought and to some degree of religious history, I hear a lot of parallels with Calvinistic view and coming apocalypse and the division of the world between good people and evil people who will be destroyed. And something in me is not, despite how compelling I find so many of these stories and how attractive the Hopi connection with the cycles of nature and their cosmological knowledge and all that I think they have to instruct us with. When we move from that into a very literal interpretation of prophecies with that kind of bifurcation and apocalyptic outlook, which we see in other traditions too, I'm just wondering how literally you see all that, and would you acknowledge the parallels that think I'm noting between your presentation of that and in fact your own early formation in the Calvinistic tradition, if I'm correct. So let me just throw those things at you.
Okay. So I'll just respond to saying, first of all, my own training wasn't in Calvinism, but in John Wesley's tradition. So
excuse me, but that does derive out of the Reformed tradition of Western Protestantism, which is how I was.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Calvinist tradition.
We could debate that, but I don't want to get sidelined on that. I think I need to hold intention here. Two things. First, the tension is between the metaphor and the description of actual events. Ultimately, metaphors. All history is metaphoric. Some more closely related to the event than others. but I also hold in tension a sense of destiny and a sense of choice. And so for me, I think the choice, as I read not only this prophecy but others, is between. I think the destiny so far is that we inevitably seem to foul our habitat. Uh, the free choice comes in. How deep will that go? And using the description of addiction, I was saying it has yet to be decided by us humans as to whether we'll hit a low bottom or a low bottom where we lose. In using the addiction model again, where we lose our house, our job, our loved ones, and find ourselves on the street, or whether we hit a low bottom and are able to transition in a more a less drastic point of experience.
Mhm.
So I hold those in tension, both sides, both sides. I, on the one hand, I feel there's a sense of an inevitability in the choices that we are making. See, we're making choices over and over again. There's a certain inevitability that in the choices we made in our election, and they're having that same choice in the Netherlands and in Italy and in France. So that's how I would respond.
Thank you.
So I just want to say how grateful I am that we have nearly 70 participants, live participants on this call today. And that speaks to the interest that we all have in where our world is going. And so in order to get some kind of lively discussion on here, since we don't have Jim, we don't have Georgie there in London on another, I'm going to ask, although they don't know I'm going to ask some people here in the room to respond to this prophecy. So, Lily, why don't you come over? Just make a brief response. This is Lily Rowden. She's here in the room with us.
Hello, everyone. Mark, you were very challenging, and I was thinking about Mark. You were very challenging, and I was thinking about what you were saying. So I'm going to scoot over here where I kind of see you, and where you can see a little bit of me. Yeah, I was thinking about as I read the book of Hopi, how so often the Hopi myths coordinated with some of our Christian myths, and how it seemed like there was an underlying story, that metaphor of history that the people remember through the generations and seem to touch into with their story. And so for me, there is a truth in it that we can't fully touch. So that's my piece.
Okay, good. So now I'm going to call on, before I respond, I'm going to call on Teresa Ishade to come. Teresa is a master's level student, and she's here in an Earth Tribe immersion. So any response you have?
Yeah, I do like the idea that we talk about spirals, that we continue to come back, like the conversations we had prior, like, you know, we go through this spiral and the circle, and we destroy ourselves, and then we start back up again. And I love also the concept of that we are the seeds. We're planting the seeds. I believe that's our, as mentors and studying that, that's our job and our legacy, to be the seed and plant on as well.
Right. Good. Good. Beautiful. You want to say something, Judith?
I want to say that it's great to see Mark Ryan. Hello, Mark. It's been a long time. I'm fascinated with ancient prophecies, because it seems like these cycles recycle over and over. And I'm not any kind of historian or anything like that, but having met some Native American people over time, or Indians, and worked with Bearheart, the Indian, there seems to be some kind of ancient wisdom that flows through these cycles of life. I think we can, if we pay attention, we can learn a lot from that, and perhaps change the future. I don't know if that's possible, but it would certainly be wonderful if we could do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Will? Okay, so this is Will Turner, and he's speaking from the perspective of a 22-year-old.
22-year-old. I feel honored to be here. I haven't read the book of Hopi, but there's one truth that I think resonated with the story I heard, and with my friends and peers that I work with in university, is that there is no possible way to grow without pain. Growing pains, or is the one truth that I found. And I think if you look at the earth and civilization as a living being, right now we might be seeing some growing pains. So I think that although it may seem negative in the moment, that it is foretelling the positive in the future. And I do believe that there is a strong sense of hope in people my age. Maybe they don't quite yet, but again, I'm honored to hear that story.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And we get a response from Dan, not as the tech guy, but as the Dan guy.
So, you know, as I listen to these prophecies as expressed, you know, through the words of this elder, it occurs to me that there is a source of that wisdom that's independent of the person speaking it. And so, and that source of wisdom is available really to all of us. And that there are those like the Indians that have cultivated their ability to experience that wisdom and then to be able to express it. And so I think that it's a real opportunity for us to pay attention to the words of the wise elders, but to also cultivate our ability to access the wisdom that I believe is present and that we just simply don't have easy access to.
Okay, well, good. So, Mark, come back and see if you have some responses to these people who responded.
Well, I love the Dan's remarks there, and you know where I guess I mean, Will, your presentation was brilliant, and I really appreciate and thank you for all that you've introduced me to in these readings, in your comments, but also over the years about the Native American traditions. It's really affected my worldview. But it hasn't converted me entirely. I'm sympathetic to Dan's sense of this source of wisdom being in all of us and all of us capable of seeing it. And therefore, there's something in me that rebels against the bifurcation of seed people and the rest of the world who are leading us to destruction. So I have that tension to work with. And also the Will Turner's comments about a sense of hope. You know, there is there's a certain looseness about prophecies that can, I think, lead us to great wisdom, but that also, if taken too literally, can lead us quite astray. I was just reading, this is going back to Lily Rowden's comment about coordination with Christian myths, and I wish I had the copy of it here, but there was an article in the paper a couple of days ago analyzing evangelical support of Donald Trump and bringing to bear prophecies about how all the good forces in the world were going to rally around Donald Trump, and the bad forces were going to be aiming for his destruction, and this was all based on biblical prophecies. So I take them with a kind of spirit in which I want to see them deepening my wisdom, but but not in expressing necessarily a predetermined external development of the world. They're things that I am most comfortable looking at with an eye on my internal psychology, on the way they help reveal to me sources deep within myself, but not in how they predict that the world will end up as a battle between all the forces of good on one side and all the forces of evil on the other. That's easy for political world to fall into. I think of Teddy Roosevelt. We stand at Armageddon and we battle for the Lord. So I'm just like to see those prophecies applied to the internal dynamics of the psyche, and just begin to question how fully they can be applied to the world of external events.
Right. So a couple of comments as we kind of reach the end of our time together. First of all, there is a certain inevitability, is there not, though not entirely determined, when humans go through their developmental phases. They learn to walk, they learn to talk, they have, whether they choose it or not, a testosterone or hormones enter in. They go through developmental phases, they live, they mature, eventually they die. And these are intermingled with choices that are made about how those phases are being navigated. Another thing I would say also is the most Native American or Indian prophecies are quite devoid of what you just mentioned. There's very little sense of good people and evil people, but rather a recognition that the remnant really is for people who are deeply connected with the sacred land, and from those remnants, new seeds are planted. But it's always great to talk with you, and it's been wonderful. Even as we've been talking, this is one of the advantages of technology. Even as we've been talking, the number of people participating in this conversation has been increasing. So usually when we have this kind of presentation, people stay on for the main presentation, but as soon as there's question and answer, they start dropping off. But in this case, the number of people who are actually joining the call has increased. And so I think that tells us. One final statement. What is very difficult for us humans to grasp, who have grown up in the soil of Western civilization, it's very difficult for us to grasp that we're not the apex of history. That is, the Enlightenment has been to celebrate the capacity of humanity. But it's in that capacity that we have found our challenge. And it's in returning to a humility of being simply a species among species that these prophecies are pointing. And keep in mind, the word prophecy in the deeper sense is not a prediction of the future, but a witness to what is unfolding and what has unfolded. so that the Greek word for prophecy is tied to what we speak of as a witnessing presence. Okay, well, good, everybody. I hope you'll come back and next in April, and we'll explore even further about this, and we'll have the technology part of it corrected at that time. And also, just know that in September, the third week in September, we're going to have a gathering here in Wimberley for people who would like to water the seeds of a new civilization. So you can find out from that by going to our website. And thank you so much for joining us today. And it's my privilege, my humble privilege, to be able to share a bit with you.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah.